Welcome to the 2023 Community Economic Development Planning Grant Notice of Funding Opportunity Pre-Application Presentation. This presentation provides prospective applicants of the Community Economic Development Program with details about the 2023 CED Planning Grant competition. Please note that we will be referring to the Community Economic Development Program as the CED program throughout this presentation. The 2023 CED Planning Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, is now available on the CED Grants webpage of the Administration for Children and Families website. The Administration for Children and Families will be referred to as ACF throughout this presentation. The Office of Community Services, also known as OCS, wants to bring to your attention some important details about the 2023 CED Planning Grant competition. Each of these details, as discussed in Section 4, Application and Submission Information of the NOFO, will be discussed in more detail later in this presentation. ACF requires applications to be electronically submitted via www.grants.gov. The deadline for electronic application submission is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on July 12, 2023. The deadline for receipt of paper applications is 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time on this date. Keep in mind, to submit a paper application, you must obtain a waiver in advance. Each applicant may only upload 2 electronic files, one for the project description and another for the appendices. All project application materials must be included in these 2 files. Additional files that are loaded into grants.gov as part of the project description or appendices will be removed from the competitive review file and not reviewed by the panel. The exceptions to this are the standard forms and OMB approved forms, which will not be counted as additional files. Carefully note the file naming conventions required by www.grants.gov. Limit file names to 50 characters, which includes characters and spaces. Adobe Acrobat is compatible with use with grants.gov. However, we recommend using the grants.gov compatible version of Adobe Reader software. Read the troubleshooting page on grants.gov for more information. OCS is excited to kick off the 2023 CED Planning Grant competition. The Notice of Funding Opportunity is available at the URL listed on this slide. To start off today's presentation, we will talk a bit about the purpose of the CED Planning Grant. Although the CED program is transforming many communities, OCS has learned through communications with award recipients, previous applicants, and potential applicants that there are many areas of the country that need a CED award, but do not have adequate time or resources to plan for the CED application. Many of these potential applicants are in some of the highest persistent poverty areas throughout the country. OCS is committed to ensuring that communities in greatest need are supported in their efforts to compete for CED funding and ultimately create new job opportunities for individuals with low incomes. Accordingly, OCS has made this planning grant funding available to support a variety of administrative capacity building activities that will ultimately allow potential applicants adequate time and resources to put together a viable CED application. The objective of this funding opportunity is to focus resources in persistent high poverty areas that have been unable to put forth a viable CED project in the past. With CED planning funds, CDCs in these areas will be provided with financial assistance for administrative capacity building. With increased administrative capacity, CDCs will be better equipped to design a sustainable business project and package a viable competitive application to be submitted in a CED competition within the 12 months at the end of the project period. OCS-funded programs are vital in addressing persistent poverty and pervasive disparities and inequities. To achieve this vision, OCS established a few overarching priorities to ensure that our goals are achieved across the country. Award recipients must ensure that these priorities are considered throughout the planning and execution of activities. This funding opportunity is aligned with the following priorities. 1. Ensuring that programs we administer are of the highest quality possible and are reaching those most in need. 2. Lifting up voices from the field and using lessons learned to be thoughtful, inclusive, and innovative in our approach. 3. Identifying opportunities to break down silos and implement cross-cutting initiatives within OCS and ACF and across the federal government. And 4. Focusing on 3 additional priorities that complement and strengthen the others. They are 1. Executive Order 14008, tracking the climate crisis at home and abroad in the Justice 40 initiative, which underscores funding support for energy communities. 2. increasing equity in the geographic distribution of CED funds, and 3. breaking down service silos and leveraging existing partnerships across OCS programs to reduce poverty through a wraparound service model for communities with low incomes. In Section 3, Eligibility Information, the NOFO notes that in order to receive a grant award, applicants must be a private, nonprofit community development corporation, or CDC. The premise of the program is that nonprofit CDCs know their community and are posed to efficiently and effectively create new community economic development projects. To be a qualified CDC, an applicant must meet and demonstrate all 3 of the following conditions. First, the applicant must be a private, nonprofit CDC with 501c3. Second, the applicant must have articles of incorporation or bylaws demonstrating that the CDC has a principal purpose in the planning, developing, or managing of low-income housing or community economic development activities. And finally, the applicant's board of directors must have representation from each of the following groups: community residents, business leaders, and civic leaders. Community or faith-based organizations that meet these requirements are also eligible to apply. The same statute applies to organizations regardless of whether they are faith-based. Applications from individuals, including sole proprietorships, and foreign entities are not eligible and will be disqualified from competitive review and funding under this funding opportunity. Please see Section 3.3, Other Application Disqualification Factors for more information. CED funds under this opportunity may be used to implement a diverse set of activities that will lead to the development of a viable CED project concept and a CED application that will allow CDCs to compete for future CED funding. We will go over a few in this section, but please note that this list is not exhaustive. Other activities not listed here may be eligible uses of CED funds. First, CED funds can be used to develop, update, or expand existing community economic development visioning statements and planning documents. Additionally, CED funds can be used to convene and organize stakeholders within the target community to strategize on shared economic development efforts, visions, and desired paths forward. Obtaining and expanding community buy-in for planned economic development efforts is another eligible use of funding. More detail on eligible uses of funding can be found in the NOFO in Section 1, Program Description. CED planning funds may be used for gathering existing data and conducting data collection efforts to assess local economic assets and identify viable markets for business development. In addition, CED funds can be used for identifying existing federal, state, local, and private funding opportunities that can be leveraged, along with CED funds, to implement business development and job creation projects. Developing and securing partnerships with social service providers, such as workforce development agencies and safety net providers to support economic development projects, is another eligible use of funding. CED planning funds may be also used to develop a business plan for an identified business development or economic development opportunity that describes uses and sources of funding, market analysis and strategy, products, services, and target customer base, marketing and sales plan, management plan, and operations plan. Again, more detail on eligible uses of funding can be found in the NOFO in Section 1, Program Description. Recipients under this program may opt to transfer a portion of substantive programmatic work to other organizations through subawards. The prime recipient must maintain a substantive role in the project. ACF defines a substantive role as conducting activities and/or providing services funded under the award that are necessary and integral to the completion of the project. Subrecipient monitoring activities alone do not constitute a substantive role. Furthermore, ACF does not fund awards where the role of the applicant is primarily to serve as a conduit for passing funds to other organizations, unless that arrangement is authorized by statute. More information about subawards can be found in the NOFO in Section 1, Program Description. The award recipient must make equity a focal point, addressing the existing inequities created by the continuing and historical marginalization of underserved communities, and those disproportionately impacted by persistent poverty. Advancing equity creates opportunities for the improvement of communities that have been historically underserved and supports historically marginalized individuals and communities in reaching their full potential, which benefits all of society. Award recipients must pursue a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all, which will require a demonstrated understanding and vision of equity and inclusion, as well as the identification of root causes of inequity, including the identification of existing activities and policies that perpetuate systemic barriers to opportunities. To capture opportunities that lead to increased equity, and to identify the actual needs of the community, the award recipient must intentionally include and amplify the voice of community members while collecting information and developing and implementing CED projects. Prospective applicants should also note the important post-award requirements outlined in Section 6.3. Recipients of funding under the CED program are required to submit performance progress and financial reports periodically throughout their project period. These forms include the Performance Progress Report, or the PPR, is submitted semi-annually throughout the project to report on key outcomes. It is submitted through the Grant Solutions Online Data Collection (OLDC) system. Financial reports are also submitted semi-annually, and this is how recipients will report expenditures and federal transactions. Additionally, it is expected that for all facility-related projects, the applicable OMB-approved SF429 forms will be submitted along with supporting documents in the Grant Solutions OLDC system. Depending on the nature of the project, recipients may also be required to submit one or more additional forms. More information on what forms need to be submitted and when will be provided upon receiving the award. ACF plans to implement a federally sponsored evaluation strategy to assess the success of approved CED planning projects. The federal evaluation strategy will include recipient-level documentation of activities, outputs, and outcomes. All funded recipients are required to agree to participate fully in federal evaluations if selected, and to follow all evaluation protocols established by ACF or its designee contractor. Fully participating in a federal evaluation may include, but is not limited to, supporting and complying with special data collection requirements, providing additional administrative data on program participation or service receipt, facilitating on-site meetings and observations, including interviews with program and partner managers and staff as well as participants, and incorporating planned variation into program strategies. Recipients selected to be in a federal evaluation will receive technical assistance and other support in meeting evaluation requirements. Recipients included in a federal evaluation must also meet regular award reporting requirements specified in this funding opportunity. As noted in Section 2, Federal Award Information, for fiscal year 2023, $1.5 million is available to fund CED planning projects. The maximum award level for individual CED projects this year is $150,000. The length of each project, also known as the project period, is 24 months. OCS anticipates funding approximately 10 CED planning projects for fiscal year 2023. Now, we will discuss some general format requirements for submitting an application for a CED grant, as discussed in Section 4 Application and Submission Information of the NOFO. It is very important to read Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, very closely. All applications must be submitted electronically using www.grants.gov. If you do not have an internet connection or the computing capacity to upload large files, then you must request and obtain an exemption to submit a paper application prior to the closing date. At the end of Section 4.2, see the section on Request an Exemption from Required Electronic Application Submission for more details on requesting an exemption. Keep in mind, there may be some differences in application formatting and submission requirements for paper applications, so pay close attention to those requirements in the NOFO. For this presentation, we will focus on the requirements for electronic applications. All applications, both paper and electronic, must be double-spaced and use 12-point font in Times New Roman, except for footnotes, which may be 10-point Times New Roman. The parts of the application that may have different formatting requirements are listed on this slide and will be highlighted throughout the presentation. All applicants must submit and upload all required elements and supporting documentation in 2 files, the project description and the appendices. All submissions, inclusive of the project description and the appendices, are limited to 50 pages total. Details about the items included in the project description and appendices can be found in Section 4.2, Page Limitations and Content for all submission formats. These 2 files and page limitations do not include standard forms or OMB-approved forms. An example of such a form is the SF424. These forms will be submitted separately as directed in the online system. Applications with additional files will be amended and files will be removed from the review. It is recommended that applicants use Adobe PDF to electronically combine documents instead of scanning multiple documents into one manually. We have also provided a resource on this slide which provides instructions and guidance on converting and combining files via grants.gov. In the next two slides, we will discuss the details of what these two files must include. Section 4.2, Page Limitations and Content for All Submission Formats, states that the project description file must include the items presented on this slide. All items must be labeled, numbered, and organized clearly in the table of contents. Keep in mind, this is the narrative of your application, and it may include references to supporting documentation that may be included in the Appendices file. In such instances, applicants should provide clear references using item name, location, and page numbers. For example, you may include a reference to the letters of support that are included in the application, and then include the actual letters in the Appendices file. Section 4.2, Page Limitations and Content for All Submission Formats, states that the Appendices file must include the items presented on this slide. All items must be labeled, numbered, and organized clearly in the table of contents. Keep in mind, all submissions inclusive of the project description and the appendices are limited to 50 pages total. It is extremely important for applicants to read the NOFO very closely and submit all of the required information and forms outlined in the announcement. This information determines the applicant's eligibility for CED Planning Grant funding. If applicants fail to include any of the requested information, it will reduce or eliminate their chance of receiving a CED Planning Grant. Additionally, it is strongly encouraged that applicants review the definition of terms and utilize the checklist provided in the NOFO to ensure all required materials have been submitted. Applicants can find the definition of terms in Section 1 of the NOFO and the checklist in Section 8. Now, we will discuss in more detail each of the components of a CED application by reviewing Section 5.1. This section provides a description of how reviewers will review and score applications. When putting an application together, refer to this section which focuses on evaluation criteria, as well as corresponding language in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission. Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, provides detailed instructions on how to put an application together. The first part of the application is the project summary. It should be one single-space page in Times New Roman, 12-point font. Please place the following at the top of the abstract: project title, applicant name, address, contact phone numbers, voice, fax, cell, email address, website address if applicable. The project summary or abstract should include a brief description of the proposed grant project, including the needs to be addressed, the proposed services, and the population groups to be served. The project description in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, provides a summary of application requirements, and Section 5.1, Criteria, provides information on how the application criteria are evaluated and ranked in competition with other applications for available assistance. A list of the evaluation criteria and additional bonus criteria are presented on this slide. Please remember that while you know you have a great project, how the project is described and the supporting evidence in the application package is extremely important. While we ask you to be concise, you also have to provide enough information for reviewers who know community development but who don't know your challenges or your community are provided enough details to see the success of this project in a very short time period. More will be said about the review process in later slides. We will now review the evaluation criteria. The first evaluation criterion, need for assistance, is worth 10 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application establishes a clear need for the project as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission. Clearly identify the physical, economic, social, financial, institutional, and/or other problems requiring a solution. The need for assistance, including the nature and scope of the problem, must be demonstrated. Supporting documentation may be included in the appendix. Any relevant data based on planning studies or needs assessments should be included or referred to in the endnotes or footnotes. Specifically, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that administrative capacity building is needed to expand community infrastructure and prepare the underserved community to implement an economic development project that will ultimately provide jobs in the community that individuals with low incomes can get and keep, that are not being created by other organizations, and create or expand participating businesses and create new jobs. Reviewers will also consider the extent to which the application provides recently published, within the past 5 years, and relevant evidence that both the unemployment rate and the poverty rate within the project's service area are equal to or greater than the state or national level. The next evaluation criterion, objective, is worth 15 points. Applicants must address how the objectives of their planning project relate to the overall purpose of the CED program, and describe how objectives will be achieved. Reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the proposed planning project will be implemented in a community that needs additional administrative capacity building to conceptualize a viable CED project, and develop an application that will allow them to compete for future CED funding by describing in detail the current state of community infrastructure and clearly articulating any gaps with respect to one or more of the following: convening community stakeholders, developing a community vision for community economic development, obtaining community buy-in for economic development activities, assessing local economic assets, identifying viable markets for business development, identifying existing federal, state, local, and private funding opportunities, and developing and formalizing community partnerships. The next evaluation criterion, approach, is worth 30 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application describes in detail how the planned activities will result in the community infrastructure needed to develop a viable, equitable CED project and application that can compete for future CED funding. Outline a plan that describes the scope and detail of how the proposed project will be accomplished. Applicants must account for all functions and activities identified in the application. The action plan should include how proposed activities related to securing community partnerships will be implemented, how proposed activities related to economic development visioning will be implemented, the type, audience, frequency, and objectives of community outreach and engagement activities that will be implemented, the approach by which local assets will be documented and evaluated, how studies will be performed to understand the local business climate and market for products and services, how research will be performed to inventory and identify local, state, regional, national, and private opportunities to obtain additional funding for CED project conceptualization and implementation, how activities related to the project will prioritize equity, cite potential obstacles and challenges to accomplishing project goals, and explain strategies that will be used to address these challenges. The next evaluation criterion, organizational capacity, is worth 25 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the organization, staff, and project partners have sufficient overall experience to carry out the project, as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission. Specifically, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the organization, its staff, and its project partners have sufficient overall experience to successfully implement the proposed project, including relevant experience and success in developing and operating businesses similar to those to be conducted under the proposed project. If one or more project partners are involved, the application should demonstrate that the combined capacity of the applicant and the partner organizations is sufficient to successfully implement the proposed project. Reviewers will also evaluate if the application includes a resolution, meeting minutes, or other documentation demonstrating that the board of directors has granted approval for the proposed project. Lastly, reviewers will consider if the application identifies staff that will be responsible for maintaining oversight of each program activity, staff, and partners, and describes procedures and policies used to oversee staff and/or partners/contractors. For applicants that cannot demonstrate substantial experience with economic development projects, similar to those proposed in the application should provide evidence of a viable partnership with a more experienced partner, including evidence of a strategy for the more experienced partner, as defined in Section 1, Program Description, to provide the administrative, technical, and/or financial technical assistance needed to ensure the success of the project. The application should include signed agreements as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, the project description, third-party agreements. Additionally, reviewers will review the extent to which the application demonstrates with sufficient detail through biographical sketches, degree information, resumes, and descriptions of previous experience that the identified staff have sufficient skills and experience to carry out the proposed project. They will consider the extent to which the application states clearly whether all key project staff positions are filled. In cases where a key staff person has not yet been hired, the application demonstrates that an appropriate position description, recruitment strategy, and estimated hiring timeline have been developed. They will consider the extent to which it describes how any confidential or sensitive information will be collected and protected during the course of the project, and how this information will be disposed of after the grant is ended, as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, the project description, protection of sensitive and/or confidential information. And they will consider the extent to which it includes a plan that demonstrates the applicant's capacity to responsibly manage the proposed federal funds and to adequately protect any federal funds awarded under the application through a financial management system, as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, the project description, plan for oversight of federal award funds and activities. The next evaluation criterion, letters of support, is worth 5 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates sufficient public support to successfully carry out the project, as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission. Specifically, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application includes letters of support from local or regional government agencies or community organizations that identifies the individual writing the letter, the organization they represent, the date, and reasons for supporting the proposed project. The next evaluation criterion, project budget and budget justification, is worth 15 points. In reviewing the project budget and budget justification, reviewers will consider the extent to which the budget for the project demonstrates that the applicant has sufficient funds available, i.e., conditioned only on the receipt of this award, and that the planned expenditures are necessary, appropriate, and reasonable for the success of the project, as outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, the project budget and budget justification. Specifically, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the amount of funds available for the planning project is commensurate with the level of effort necessary to accomplish the activities, goals, and objectives of the planning project. Reviewers will also consider that the application includes financial estimates that demonstrate the necessity, reasonableness, and allocation of the proposed costs to carry out the activities proposed in the application. The application should also include a budget and budget justification that clearly links the proposed expenditures to the proposed activities necessary for accomplishing the planning project. Lastly, reviewers will consider that the application's budget narrative demonstrates in sufficient detail the appropriateness and reasonableness of the line items proposed, and that the budget is appropriate for accomplishing the proposed planning project. The last evaluation criteria we will discuss are the 5 opportunities for bonus points. Each opportunity is worth 3 additional points. The opportunities are projects located in states or trust territories without active CED grants, projects located in energy communities, projects implemented in partnership with OCS programs, CED projects supporting Native American communities, and alignment with Justice 40 initiative. More information on how reviewers will evaluate bonus points can be found under Section 5, Application Review Information of the NOFO. Now, we will discuss the process for submitting your CED application. More information on the process is found in Section 4, Application and Submission Information. Both first-time and repeat applicants are strongly encouraged to review this information well in advance of the application deadline, as OCS will not be able to extend the deadline. All applications must be received by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on the due date via grants.gov. Applications submitted after this deadline will not be reviewed. All applicants must complete 3 registrations in order to submit a grant application. System for Award Management (SAM) registration, updated annually. Unique Entity Identifier (UEI), and grants.gov registration. Please note that the registration process for grants.gov can take up to 10 days, so all applicants are strongly encouraged to review this information well in advance of the application deadline. Applications submitted by an Authorized Organizational Representative, or AOR, that does not have current registrations will be rejected by grants.gov. For detailed guidance on how to register and update registration for all 3 systems, please visit the Register and Get Ready resource available on the ACF website at the URL listed on this slide. If you encounter any trouble submitting your application, you must obtain a ticket number directly from the grants.gov help desk. A ticket number is required for all waiver requests. ACF may extend an application due date and receipt time when circumstances such as natural disasters occur, such as floods, hurricanes, etc., when there are widespread disruptions of mail service or in other rare cases. The determination to extend or waive due date and receipt time requirements rests with ACF's Chief Grants Management Officer. Applications are required to be submitted electronically at www.grants.gov unless the applicant has received an exemption in writing from the ACF Grants Officer. Details about how to obtain waivers are described in the NOFO under Section 4.2. If a waiver is granted, hard copy applications are due 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Refer to the funding announcement for the address to submit an application. Applicants submitting applications electronically do not need to provide additional copies of their application materials. Electronically submitted applications will be considered late and disqualified if the date or timestamp is after 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on the due date. Detailed instructions on submitting applications electronically are available on the grants.gov website. Again, more information on the process is found in Section 4, Application and Submission Information. Now, we will discuss the details of the application review process as discussed in Section 5, Application Review Information of the NOFO. The NOFO discusses the application review process in Section 5.2, Review and Selection Process. Every application received from a qualified CDC will be reviewed if it is submitted on time and as long as the request is not over the maximum funding level of $150,000. No more than 2 files would be provided to the panel to read and review. Once an application passes the initial screening, it will be reviewed and scored based on its responsiveness to the evaluation criteria in Section 5 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It will be reviewed and scored by a panel composed of non-federal community economic development professionals and other social service professionals. The application will be reviewed for content completeness. Therefore, a very important aspect of the application is the inclusion of all documentation needed to support written statements. The easiest way to certify that your organization is covering all of the bases is by submitting all of the elements in the application checklist presented in Section 8, Other Information, of the NOFO. Again, more detail on the application review process can be found in the NOFO in Section 5.2, Review and Selection Process. Highly ranked applications are not guaranteed funding. Reviewer scores weigh heavily in funding decisions, but they are not the only factor considered. There are several other important factors also taken into consideration. The NOFO includes several factors ACF and OCS will consider when making awards. The OCS director has discretion to make all final funding decisions. Again, the NOFO discusses the application review process in full detail in Section 5.2, Review and Selection Process. All applicants who are funded will be notified by email no later than September 30th, 2023, from Grant Solutions. Grant Solutions is a comprehensive grants management system provided by the Grant Center of Excellence. Applicants that are not awarded a grant will receive an email from the OCS Operations Center with a copy of the panel's comments about the strengths and weaknesses of their application. While your project may have been very good, OCS only has enough funding to award grants to a small percentage of applicants. More on the award process can be found in Section 6, Federal Award Administration Information of the NOFO. Several reference websites are included in the NOFO that may be of use in putting together an application. These websites are also listed on this slide. This concludes our presentation on the 2023 CED Planning Notice of Funding Opportunity.